Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're going to be breaking down another playoff series, this time the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Phoenix Suns. This is another one of those matchups that feels like it's a toss-up. Everybody has very differing opinions, and it's a weird series because these two teams got here on very different paths. The Minnesota Timberwolves, of course, exceeded basically anybody's expectations, winning 56 games, the most since 2004 for the franchise. Anthony Edwards became an all-star and is going to be likely all-NBA second team. Gobert bounced back from a down year and became a DPOY again. Karl Anthony Towns and him really worked together this season with Cat, getting back to being an all-star level player, dropping 20 points per game on right around 50, 40, 90 before his injury. It was a really successful year, and they held down the one seed for a majority of the season. Just unfortunately faltered a little bit down the stretch with the Cat injury, and it was enough to push them behind Oklahoma City and Denver, landing them at the number 3 spot, with them losing the last game of the season to put them in that situation. And the team that they lost to is the team they're going to have to face with the Phoenix Suns. Phoenix was billed by most people as a top 4 seed going into the season and a Western Conference contender. I believe I had them as the 1 or the 2 seed, and this was for a number of reasons. The first one was, of course, the Bradley Beal trade. They went ahead and added a third member to this big three of Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and now Beal. They also added Frank Vogel as a defensive-minded coach. I thought they made some pretty decent offseason signings. I liked the pickup of Grayson Allen getting involved in the Dame trade to grab him. Didn't love Yusuf Nurkic swapping him in for DeAndre Ayton, but I thought it could work still, and I liked the depth that they built up, even though it wasn't the best in the world. I felt like they had a pretty good offseason, and it was one that was going to get them towards the top of the West. But ultimately, they've kind of just spent all year fighting to stay out of the play-in tournament, both due to injuries to that big three, which was a big concern coming into the season, and also just underperforming across the board. A lot of their depth pickups as well just didn't work out, guys that they would eventually trade away or they would phase out of the rotation. But to their credit, the Suns finished the year really strong. They had one of the toughest schedules, easily the hardest one down the stretch of the season. A lot of people thought they're going to end up in the play-in. Some people predicted them to be like a 9 seed or a 10 seed, but they stayed afloat. And not only did they stay afloat, they made their way out of the play-in tournament with their last win of the season against the Minnesota Timberwolves, moving them up to the 6th spot ahead of the Pelicans and setting up this matchup in the first place. And it's a matchup that has a lot of people buzzing. I've seen this one talked about a ton over the past couple of days, and it feels like there is real upset potential brewing here because as great as the Wolves have been, the Phoenix Suns may just very well be their kryptonite. It's going to be an exciting matchup between these two teams. I'm going to go ahead and break down all of the nuances, the key factors in my opinion to this series and who goes ahead and wins it. And of course, at the end, I'll give you my official prediction, even though I really don't want to because this one is really tough. And even as I record this video, I'm still not that sure about my pick. Let's kick things off by talking about where they land statistically. The Minnesota Timberwolves were the number 1 defense, pretty significant margin there. They led the pack in that regard the entire year, the 17th ranked offense and the 3rd best net rating in the NBA, while the Phoenix Suns had the 13th defense, 10th offense, and have the 8th best net rating in the NBA. So the Suns are a bit more well-rounded, while the Wolves are a juggernaut on one end and a bit shaky on the other. These two teams also match up 3 times this season, with one matchup coming back in November, and the last 2 happening within the last week and a half, actually. These two teams played twice over the course of like 9 days, and bad news for the Timberwolves, the Suns dominated all 3 of these meetings. They won all 3 games by double digits, I believe led by double digits the entire second half of all of these contests. The first game they won by 18, on April 5th they won by 10 in a game without Karl Anthony Towns, and then in the last day of the season, the Suns won very convincingly 125-106 in Minnesota to again set the matchup up here. So if these regular season matchups are any indication, this is not a great matchup for Minnesota, and the more that I see tweets from Timberwolves fans, I went through their subreddit before recording this, Wolves fans are not happy that this is the matchup. This is the last team they wanted to face, and as we go through the keys, you'll see exactly why this was the nightmare draw for Minnesota. So let's go ahead and talk about the keys to this matchup. It all begins with that lockdown Wolves defense going up against the pretty potent Phoenix Suns offense. Not only are the Wolves the best defensive team in the league this season, but they are the best defensive team by a significant margin. They are 2.2 points of defensive rating better than the 2nd spot Boston Celtics. That makes them one of only 4 teams joining the 2020 Bucks, 2016 Spurs, and 08 Celtics to be this far ahead of the pack in defensive rating over the last 20 years. every one of those teams won at least in the first round, and the Celtics, of course, went on to win the title. Rudy Gobert is, of course, at the heart of this unit. He's going to win Defensive Player of the Year very deservingly. He's having another all-time level rim protection season. He's one of the best rim protectors and defenders in NBA history. And now, unlike where in Utah he was very often the only line of defense, he's now surrounded by some pretty good defenders as well. Anthony Edwards has evolved a ton defensively over the course of his career to the point where he's not afraid of taking on these high-profile matchups and oftentimes excels against those great players. He's not afraid to go out there and try and make the game-winning defensive play. Really special player on both ends of the ball. Jay McDaniels should be an all-defensive guy. Gilgeous-Alexander Walker has evolved a ton on that end, really special defensively too. You've got a lot of size between Gobert and Jay McDaniels and Cat and Naz Reid. Just all of these 6'9" to 6'10", 7-foot guys that are clogging up the paint. Really have to go through the trees if you want to try and get to the basket. Even not the great defenders hold their own. Basically, it's hell to try and score against this team. Specifically, if you try and get down low or try and shoot at the three-point line. They focus on those two areas in particular and try to tell teams, hey, if you're going to beat us, you've got to beat us in the mid-range. Gobert is going to deter you around the rim, block your shots. They're going to have a bunch of size out there. They've got length on the perimeter. You've got to beat them from the mid-range if you want to try and beat this team reliably. And this is a defense that has worked incredibly well all season and would work really well against most teams. But the Phoenix Suns may be just the perfect counter in the modern NBA to this type of scheme. Mainly because they are a mid-range heavy squad. They shoot a ton of middies, specifically Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. Both of them are top 4 in mid-range jumpers per game, and both are very efficient in that area, shooting over 50% on those looks. So you can keep them away from the rim and the three-point line, but if you let them shoot middies, you're not going to have a lot of fun because that's where they want to get in the first place. Not to mention, Bradley Beal is also very comfortable shooting that mid-range jumper and is playing the best basketball he has in the Suns uniform over these past 10 games or so. He had a lot of 30 pieces or really efficient scoring games in general at the end of the season. He's kind of found his role as this guy who can attack the rim, can be another scoring threat out there. The Suns are looking more dynamic offensively than ever, and they love to do it in that mid-range. They don't shoot a lot of paint shots, one of the lowest rim shot frequencies in the NBA. It's kind of troublesome because if those middies are falling the way that they have a majority of the season, and especially as of late, they could completely negate the Wolves' biggest strength, which is the defensive scheme that's gotten them this far in the first place. There's also the factor that Devin Booker and Bradley Beal are both extremely strong ball handlers that can easily take advantage of mismatches on the perimeter if they get a guy like Karl Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert switched on to them, and that could make things really difficult. It could put the defense in scramble mode, and the Suns just have so many ways to attack you. It's pretty concerning. Now, one point that does go in Minnesota's favor is they still do have a lot of length and some strong help defenders that can contest mid-range jumpers well, even if the Suns are getting to that spot, and prevent the bigs from getting torched on an island. The Wolves aren't going to just roll over and die defensively, but if you're bringing over a lot of help, say the Suns get a mismatch, they start to attack downhill, it could leave you susceptible to shots from the corner from a guy like Grayson Allen, who is one of the best shooters in the entire league this season. Phoenix is going to need him to continue to play at a really high level. They're going to need Royce O'Neal, Eric Gordon, guys like that to knock down those open looks they're surely going to get. That was a problem they had last year against the Nuggets, is while they were generating a lot of open looks for their shooters, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker that is, they weren't knocking them down, and it completely sunk them. So they need to knock down those outside shots from the role players, and if they can do that, the Suns can start to run away with a number of these games. However, if they get out of rhythm, if those mid-range jumpers aren't falling, there's not going to be a lot of easy looks at the rim to help them settle in, and it could turn into a long night or series for Phoenix if they're not hitting their mid-range jumpers at their usual proficiency. So matchups that I'm really excited to see are Jay McDaniels going up against Kevin Durant. They have pretty similar body types. Jay McDaniels has been great all year, but he's going up against one of the best scorers of all time. And Anthony Edwards is probably going to end up guarding Devin Booker. That's a battle between two of the best shooting guards in the entire NBA. Going to be a lot of fun to watch those two guys go out there and duel. And like I said, Ant isn't afraid of these big moments. He's going to want to go out there, show that he's better than Booker, and lock him up. And I think he's ready for the challenge. Another key point I want to talk about is the offensive concerns for the Timberwolves, because while they've got that lockdown defense, the offense has been very shaky throughout the year. They ranked, like I said earlier, just 17th in the NBA in offensive rating, and specifically have had problems in the half court the entire season, which is not a great indicator of success in the playoffs offensively. They are not great when it comes to turnovers, have one of the highest turnover rates in the NBA, although the Phoenix Suns are also right there with them, so this series may just come down to who stops throwing the ball away, and trust me, if you watch this series, you're going to see some of the most baffling turnovers you've ever watched, so be prepared for that. And also for the Timberwolves, there's just not a lot of great shot creation on the team. Like, Conley can create some plays, Cat can take advantage of smaller defenders and knock down some shots. but a lot of their offense runs through Anthony Edwards. He is the guy that's going to have to carry a massive offensive load for them if they want to go ahead and be successful, and he's got to do it at a high level. Luckily for Minnesota, if last year's series against Denver is any indication, Ant is a massive playoff riser because against the reigning champions, he gave them hell. 31 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks with pretty efficient scoring, 48, 35, 85 splits. And keep in mind, Denver was really keying in on Anthony Edwards. This was a series where they didn't have Jay McDaniels, they didn't have Naz Reid, who are some of their threats out there. Ant was just making them pay. The second they gave him any type of space, they could put any defender on him. It just really didn't matter. Ant also this season got better. He had an all-NBA caliber year. He's on the rise towards superstardom. If he can play like he did last year in this series, it's going to be hell for the Phoenix Suns. However, one thing that is kind of scary coming into things is while Ant had an amazing season, the Phoenix Suns were pretty often his kryptonite, in addition to just the teams as a whole, because in the 3 games against Phoenix this year, Edwards had just 13 points, 17 points, and 13 points, and shot just 13 of 42 from the field over those 3 matchups. While Phoenix doesn't have a great individual defender for him, their defensive scheme is pretty tough for him to handle. He just has not had success against the Phoenix Suns, and the playoffs are a different animal. The Timberwolves are going to have a lot of time to game plan this, trying to find ways to get Anthony Edwards open looks. And again, he rose massively in last year's playoffs. I think he's just a big time player, so I think he can still be great. But it does seem like Phoenix has at least a bit of an idea how to slow him down, and if he's not playing at a ridiculous level, things could get really scary for the Wolves on the offensive end, especially because we don't know how Karl Anthony Towns is going to look. He's another guy who had an all-star caliber season, like I said earlier, 20 points per game, 50, 40, 90 roughly, but then he missed just over a month due to a knee injury. He returned for the final 2 games where he played decently but not great, and that's to be expected. He's going to be rusty, but it does leave a bit of concern about how he's going to perform in the playoffs because they need him to be at a high level. They need him to be a massive offensive threat if they want to be successful and stave off some of these offensive woes. There's also the fact that he's dropped in the playoffs both times he's been here before, and the Suns have done a great job in these matchups throughout the season of attacking him on the defensive end, putting him in pick and roll actions, just going at him in isolation. Cat is a big swing factor for this series. They need him to hold his own defensively and be somewhat reliable on the offensive end, or the Timberwolves may just be screwed. Minnesota is far from being the only inconsistent team in this matchup, though, because the Phoenix Suns have been the definition of inconsistent. It has been a wild roller coaster season all year for them, whether there's stretches where they look unbeatable, games where they look incredible, and then some games where they look like one of the worst teams in the league, and stretches where they just can't seem to buy a good win at all. Even in the same game, they'll have some moments where they look unstoppable, and then by the end of the game, they're losing by like 15 points. Specifically in fourth quarters, they've been abysmal this season. They have a minus 11.6 net rating, which is double the Miami Heat, who have the second worst in fourth quarters at minus 5.5. In the final period of games, they have been abysmal when it gets to crunch time. They turn the ball over almost more than anybody. They have the worst offense in the league in fourth quarters, a bottom 10 defense. It's a massive concern because while the Wolves are prone to their struggles, if Phoenix can't capitalize on those moments, it's going to be hard for them to go ahead and take this series against the probably overall better team. Now, the Suns have definitely improved in this area over the course of the year. Over their last 8 games, they had the 4th best net rating in fourth quarter, so they've been looking a lot better. Maybe they found their stride and they're not going to have those same collapses. But the fact that it was a year-long trend is definitely still concerning, especially when you're going to be going up against such an insane defense and great opponent every single night. And the final key I want to talk about is the battle between star power and depth. The Wolves definitely have their stars, whether it's Ant, it's Gobert, or Cat, but the Suns have these stars that have experience in these situations. Of course, Durant has made a number of finals. He's won a few rings. Devin Booker has been to a finals before, been in these big-time moments, played in a lot of playoff series. Bradley Beal has had some runs over in Washington, and now he's playing in a Phoenix team that has a bunch of experience next to him. Frank Vogel is a championship coach. They have a lot of experience, and that big three is extremely talented. But on the other side with the Wolves, they definitely have the advantage in depth because the Suns bench starts to fall off pretty quickly after like their big three, Grayson Allen and Yusuf Nurkic, depending on the night, where with Minnesota, they have Jordan McLaughlin, they have Monte Morris, they have Naz Reid, who may win Sixth Man of the Year this season, Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, Kyle Anderson has his moments. Like, they've got a bunch of guys they can go to. I trust their depth more, and so if the Timberwolves can take advantage of those moments when the Suns bench is in, if they start falling apart, that could be a big swing factor in their favor. Now, with all of that being said, that's my breakdown and my keys to the series. Now, it's time to go ahead and make a prediction. This is extremely difficult. Like I said earlier, I'm still kind of shaky about about who to pick. I think if the Wolves match up against most teams, they would have been perfectly fine because I don't think there were a lot of lower seeds that could beat them. However, this is the nightmare matchup. Phoenix is probably the worst possible draw out of any of the lower seeded teams that they could have had to face. The Suns have had their number all year. They built up a ton of momentum, and they have this offensive scheme that's potentially perfect to knock off the Wolves defense that has been so successful all season. Now, I do want to say that regular season doesn't mean everything. Just because Phoenix has been dominant against them doesn't mean they're going to win this series in like a sweep or something. Like if we go back to 2022, the Suns going into their second round matchup against the Mavericks had beat them like 8 out of their last 9 games or something like that. And then we saw how that went, where the Mavericks, of course, embarrassed the Suns in Game 7. So don't just only take the regular season matchups at face value. There's going to be a lot of adjustments. We're going to see how Chris Finch can operate in these moments. What does Frank Vogel have in store? They have a week to prepare for each other. And ultimately, I think this is a genuine toss-up. And if you look at the odds, Vegas sees that way too. I'm pretty sure it's like dead even, or the Phoenix Suns are just barely favored as I record this. But I've talked long enough. It's time to go ahead and make a prediction. Like I said earlier, I've thought a lot about this. I'm still not even sure. By the time I make my like full playoff predictions video at the end of this week, I may even change this. We'll have to wait and see. But for the moment, I think I'm ultimately going to pick the Phoenix Suns to win in 7 games. I just feel like they're the perfect counter for the Timberwolves. Again, a nightmare matchup. They have a lot of experience. The Karl Anthony Towns injury is scary to me too. I don't know how he's going to look in this series, especially because, again, he's continuously dropped off in the playoffs. The Bradley Beal resurgence, the way that Phoenix finished with a lot of momentum, gives me some hope that they're behind or at least past some of their inconsistencies. I do think Anthony Edwards is going to perform at a high level, but I don't know if he's going to be enough to keep up with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant cooking out there. Is Gobert's impact going to be somewhat limited because of the nature of the matchup with the Suns, again, being this high-level mid-range shooting team? I just think there's too many things that make me a little bit worried about Minnesota. I am going to go ahead and pick the upset here. I think there is a world where I'm overthinking this and the Wolves just are the better team. They find a way to make that defense work. Ant goes berserk and they come out of this and beat Phoenix in like 5 or 6 games. I don't think that's impossible, but I think I am going to slightly lean the upset here. Pick the Phoenix Suns to win in, I guess, an upset. Like I said, I think Vegas has the Phoenix Suns favored, but in terms of seeding, they go ahead and knock off the Minnesota Timberwolves, which would be a devastating end to one of the best seasons in franchise history. If they lose this, you have to think about, where do you go from here? How do you change this team up? Do you consider trading Karl Anthony Towns? Do you keep this Rudy Gobert thing going? Do you just make some moves on the edges? Does Chris Finch stay as your head coach? I think some important decisions will have to be made. Whereas with Phoenix, if they lose this series, you don't have a lot of years trying to compete with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. Not a lot of room to improve this team to make changes. So both these teams really need this one. And ultimately, I do think the Phoenix Suns are going to get the job done, coming back from a really rough season overall to make it to the second round and likely face off against the Denver Nuggets. With that, that's my prediction for Phoenix versus Minnesota. Let me know down below in the comments what yours is, as well as if you have any other swing factors I may not have considered or mentioned in this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. There's going to be a lot more playoff content coming up, more series breakdowns, more play-in coverage, because those games are starting today as I'm uploading this video. And of course, I'm going to make playoff predictions, break down playoff games and series as they happen. You don't want to miss out on all of that. It's the best time of the season for the channel here, so definitely make sure to tune into future videos. I appreciate y'all watching. I will see y'all later. Oh, and also let me know what other series you want to see broken down below in the comments too. A lot of y'all said on the Mavericks Clippers video you want to see this one, so that's why I'm making this one. And yeah, appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.